welcome back to the conversation stage. And if you've ever wondered what it takes to launch an AI startup, this is the event for you. So in collaboration with Creative Destruction Labs, the Turing Institute has put together a panel of innovators and change makers to pick their brains about what they've learned from the experience and what advice they give themselves in hindsight. In short, they've made the mistakes so you don't have to. The panel will be hosted by Kutlu Kazanci, and Kutlu is an Associate Director for Creative Destruction Labs AI stream. He has vast experience advising and running startups and technology companies all around the world. So Kutlu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me tell you very little about Creative Destruction Lab. It's an academic, not-for-profit mentoring organization for deep tech startups at pre-seed and seed stages. And we bring in mentors who are entrepreneurs, investors, and also scientists. So if there are researchers, scientists interested in starting a startup, co-founding a startup, or being a scientist to help startups, we are looking to engage the likes of you. I was told there's about 990 listeners, so invite 10 more friends. So let's try to get to 1,000 listeners. And 2 years ago, when we were launching CDL Oxford, we had the chance to do an event at the Turing Institute building when we were launching. It's great to be back. And yes, pleasure. And today we have three founders from three of our alumni companies, and they're gonna tell us about what they've learned, what they would do differently. And we have Natalia from DeepPlanet in the area of AI for sustainability. We have Peter from Odin Vision in the area of medical devices around digestive tract cancer detection. And then we have Imtiaz joining us from the US. He's been launching his company in the US, and he is the founder of FLOX, who is using AI technologies to improve the welfare of chicken in chicken farms. So welcome, thanks for being here. I'd like to start with Natalia. You're a researcher. Can you tell us in 3-4 minutes about your background? I know you've helped some other startups before in the area of emotion in detection. How did you decide to be part of DeepPlanet, and how did it start, and where has it arrived now?
Thank you very much for introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Natalia. I have a background in computer science. I have a PhD in neural networks from the University of Kyoto. And for many years I've been working with different startups in various roles, starting from a deep learning researcher and a CTO and a head of research currently at DeepPlanet, the company I'm representing today. So it was an interesting journey. So since I had a PhD from my academia, I was intending to continue my research in academic institution, but at some point I became really interested in business and how what I do can be applied to real business problems, and to understand how I can help people, and especially these days when the problem of sustainability is extremely important. But I started my entrepreneurship journey as a researcher in other startups, and it took me about 6 years to understand that there is a significant flaw in how researchers are organizing startups and engineers trying to run a business. So there were a few unsuccessful startups that I've experienced, and I decided to go to a business school to actually learn how to make a startup. So I went to Said Business School in the University of Oxford and spent there 2 amazing years where I've met my co-founders, Dave, who is CFO, and Sushma, who is a CEO. And we decided to organize the startup, and it was an interesting journey. We went to multiple incubators and accelerators, and in 4 years we're rapidly growing, and we're working in the development of AI for sustainable agriculture. Specifically, we're working with vineyards.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Peter, how about you? So you come from the industry, and can you tell us how you saw an opportunity or a need and then decided to launch Odin, and how you first got the initial team together?
Absolutely. So my name is Peter Manley. I'm the CEO of Odin Vision. My background is actually not so dissimilar. I have a PhD in medical imaging and machine learning from Imperial College. I came to the end of my postdoctoral work and I really wanted to go into a startup in the UK, but at that time there wasn't really many options. And so if I really wanted to see my work in the medical field transition into impacting patients, the only real options at that time was to go into industry. So I went into industry. I worked for Siemens Healthcare for about a decade in Germany, in the US and in the UK. In the UK, I was embedded in King's College, working very closely with academics and clinicians, transitioning technology from ideas into first in human. And that was incredibly exciting. But one of the frustrations of working with a big company is that they're very slow. And so around that time, I was a Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence at UCL. I was very fortunate to be able to go around and talk to lots of people there. And one of the connections I made was reconnecting with an old colleague of mine who had then gone on to become a professor at UCL. And they had developed some technology around artificial intelligence and digestive diseases that the doctors were incredibly excited about. And they had spun it out into a company. And I was complaining how slow things were taking in industry. He was telling me how fast things are in startups. And so at that point, when the company founded, I left my role at Siemens and joined the company to lead it into its commercial stages and really bring that into impacting patient lives.
Thank you for that. And Imtiaz, thanks for joining us from the US. Please tell us about kind of your background and how you got involved with, I guess, post-urban ventures and now with FLOX.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have a slightly different experience or background from Natalia and Peter, but same sort of journey. I'm involved in a number of deep tech, mostly around artificial intelligence startups from our venture builder, Post-Urban, which I'm one of the founding partners of. My other business partners are more sort of tech savvy and AI savvy. I tend to focus on the bridge between technology and commercialization. In my sort of, I bumbled around tech for a while, done a couple of startups, probably similar for the other two on the panel, some successful, some not. And I ended up with FLOX, where we found a real problem in chicken is a $500 billion industry. If you look at animal farming in general, it's $3 trillion, but it's still extremely behind when it comes to technology usage, particularly within the actual farms. And this comes with a whole host of commercial problems on top. But we're trying to apply machine vision to that space, and that's sort of the challenge we're trying to deal with.
Okay, excellent. So, I guess my first question is, what would be your top 2 or 3 pieces of advice for new researchers who are interested in a problem or have spotted a technological wave to find ways to commercialize it in a startup? What would you say your top 2, 3 pointers or guidance would be? So why don't we start with you, Natalia?
Thank you. So I think that first and most important key to success, find co-founders or like-minded peoples with complementary skills. For example, myself, I have a background in computer science and academic research, and it's very far from business. So I really needed someone who can help me to build a company. And luckily, I managed to find those people, and it might be really challenging. So in my case, it took me to business school, and there where I have found my co-founders. But in reality, there are a lot of places where you can do that, especially incubators and accelerators is a good place to search for co-founders. Second piece of advice, and I think it's equally important maybe, is to start from a good place where there is a lot of help, where there are mentors and resources to support your startup, support a venture. So I'm talking about business incubators and companies like Creative Destruction Labs, who help young, specifically co-founders who are doing it for the first time to develop a company, to establish a venture, to help find sponsors, to find VCs, to learn how to do all the business work, especially if they're from research background and coming from academia. Yeah, so I think these are two most important points.
Great. Peter?
So I think when we look at technology being transitioned out of academia, for example, or from those early stages, quite often the initial proof of concepts are based on relatively small data sets or very, very curated data sets. And it's important to understand that you have to transition to the real world at some point. And it's great, you should always have a proof of concept, you should always understand where you're heading with your technology, but there can be almost a false sense of accomplishment if you've got it working on a public data set, for example, that's been perfectly curated, and when you take it out into wild, it will perform differently. So understanding the data that you're going to be using with, and there's a huge breadth. Right, the breadth of data is phenomenal, and so when we started out, we went really strong on the breadth of data, trying to get it from different sites, different manufacturers' scopes, different levels of user as well, from experience to junior. So going broad is really important early on. The other thing I would say is that you really have to live what your end user is doing. And that's, you can be quite disconnected from that at the beginning if you're just working in data. And the data science teams or researchers can be quite disconnected from that, because it's quite easy just to stay in your lab, in your home, working away on the data. You need to get out there and see how it's going to be used. There's lots of famous examples of where technology adoption fails. One of my favorite ones is that in the NHS, a whole new system failed because it required an additional login and no one could remember the password for that login to that computer. And so you really have to get out there and get away just from the data and understand how your users are using it. And we encourage all of our employees to go out there, spend time at the hospitals by the side of the doctors to see how their technology is really being used and how impactful it can be.
Perfect. Imtiaz?
Yeah, I want to echo something Natalia said, which is about co-founders. I can't imagine something worse than being a sole co-founder. I have friends who've done it, and you can tell, it's a very stressful experience. But on that front, I would also add, trust is really important. One of the things that I've learned, the best way and the hardest way, is to really learn to trust your co-founder and build in the exercises you need for the trust to be both sides. It takes a while to find a human being that you can trust, but if you get that wrong, it can absolutely destroy your startups. And I've seen it, if you talk to any VC, they'll say the biggest issue, especially early stage, is people. So I think that finding that person or those people that you can build trust with, that you believe that they're good at what they do, but they're also someone you can trust ethically, is important. The other two things I would add is that there's a lot of ideas out there. If you guys are doing startups in deep tech, you'll come up with a gazillion ideas, or you'll come across other people with a gazillion ideas. So try to kill your ideas as early as possible, i.e. some ideas are just not going to grow in the way that you want it to. And you can test these things. You can test quickly. You can get close to the product and the market. A bit like Peter was just saying, you can go closer to your customers than maybe other people might, and just get a feeling for whether or not this is really something you want to do. Because it's so hard already with deep tech and artificial intelligence, where you're having to get the data, you need to get the scale, you need to try to, it's often you need patient capital. So it's often a good idea to kill as many threads that would risk your startup as early as possible. Test, kind of think agile, think lean. And try to be one miracle away from success. That's something my friend Irfan here in Circuit Clinical in Buffalo, who's raised a bunch of money, successful deep tech entrepreneur, says. He says, be one miracle away from success, not two. So I think that's kind of something that I've learned over the last 10 years. Don't make your life harder than it should be. It's hard enough.
Ask a reminder to the audience, there is a way for you to ask your questions. In the chat, there's a Slido tab. Please put your questions there as you are thinking about them, and others can vote them. And at the end, we'll try to carve out some time to try to answer them as well. And I think at CDL, we've seen more than 1,000 teams go through our program, and the team composition, co-founders is an essential element to success. And we do sometimes see solo founders, but even at that time, we see and encourage them to build option pools to bring in rest of the key complementary skills to the team, incentivized for the long-term success of the venture. And talking about miracles, so timing is also important as well. And so an affinity, love for the customers, the problem, the technology. So those all need to go together well. So I'll ask a question about proving, showing validation, technological and business validation and proof points. So especially when you need data, you can find yourself in a chicken and egg problem. So what are your thoughts about how you've managed this and how to best approach this puzzle? So again, let's start with Natalia.
Okay. About the validation, there are like 2 points. One first, and first most important, like business validation, and the other one technical. So they're completely different. So for technical validation, for people from academia, it's pretty straightforward. You publish papers, you disseminate research in big conferences, and people believe what they see and hear. It's also a good idea to show what you do. For example, you organize like online free showcases of what you can do. For example, in DeepPlanet, we do a lot of research on yield prediction and soil moisture prediction. So we organize free events where people can come share a piece of their data, and we predict the outcome for them. So we say, okay, based on your previous data, your yield will be X. And that works pretty well because when people see that we actually can do something and validate the results on the small amount of data, we probably can do it, right? So technical validation is simple and straightforward. Business validation is a little bit more tricky. And here also your mentors that you meet in startups and other business connections that you do during networking may be very, very important. Because in business, it's difficult to prove that you are doing what right thing when you haven't done anything yet. And for us, it was very important to be in constant collaboration with famous mentors and professors and entrepreneurs in our field who can guide us and also who can introduce us to other people useful for our business operations. And slowly, when you build your network, you start building new connections, people start trusting you, they start recognizing the title of the company or you personally, and that's very helpful to build on that and build actually sales connection and networking and acquiring customers.
Great, thank you. Peter.
Yeah, I would echo many of those things. And I think understanding what your milestones are for you as a company. They do change for every single company, obviously, but understanding what your milestones are and having that clearly laid out is not only helpful for you as a company, but also helpful for when you start to go out and talk to investors so that they can see, okay, here you are in your journey and the next big things you need to de-risk are these, and these. I think one thing that we notice when we hire out of academia, for example, though, is that if researchers and data scientists come into the company, they're very used to using the standard academic metrics for measuring the performance of machine learning models. And actually, those are subtly different in business. We still use those to measure the performance and for the researchers to be able to compare different models and different approaches. But in reality, you need to have a set of metrics that reflects the user experience. And that's really important. Understanding how the changes you make to models affect the end user is absolutely critical. So changing those metrics is really key to that. The ultimate measure for us is obviously sales. So bringing in those sales, because that's really an indication of a customer's willingness to support you and your product, and a need for it in the business as well.
Perfect. Imtiaz, what's your take?
I just want to say, reflecting back on our time when we were at Creative Destruction Lab, there was a lot of business validation questions, because it's something that investors, in particular, rightly or wrongly, ask a lot about. There's almost an assumption that you guys can sort out the technical validation side, but they do understand that business validation is very difficult. One thing that I've seen with particularly startups within the artificial intelligence space, which is a huge space, so it's hard to define that, but is you can get pilots. As a business, we have pilots with FLOX, with some very big companies, but turning pilots into recurring revenue if that's what you're going for, is a very, very painful experience. And it's one of the contributors to that kind of seed round valley of death, where companies find it very difficult to go into that growth stage, that's A, B, C round stage, or even, bootstrapping to infinity. And it's that. And one of the ways that we found, and this is mostly my CTO, Nils, who's fantastic at this, is he tries not to do it in a very waterfall way. So it's much more agile. So he tries to engage not even the customer necessarily, but users. So we talk to chicken farmers on the ground who are not necessarily going to pay us a single penny, but or like their staff, but we talk to them almost multiple times a week to understand how they're using our system. And before we even had a system, we would just show them some development samples, which are easy to create, and say, okay, what do you think about this? What would you do with this information? So it's about constantly checking in, because it's very scary to check in before you have a finalized product. But in reality, it's very difficult to come up with a finalized product anyways. So trying to go in as early as possible to get those tiny nuggets of validation, those tiny little pivots that you do every week or every month, has been super valuable. But I think it's a very scary thing. With AI, it's like, we're going to build the final product, spend this money, burn it. But then by the end of it, you might see that you're building the wrong product. So again, agile, lean thinking, constantly check in with your users, your customers, and the people who will eventually pay you money.
Great. And there are now questions on Slido. Keep those coming. Thank you very much. And there are more questions about data. So maybe we can take a bit of a deeper step into it. So there's a question about data is a rare commodity. How to get access to the right data from the real world. I guess in times when the data isn't publicly available, then you have to go and negotiate with data owners, and data is also a piece of the value, and even how you value data is a very open-ended, interesting question. So your thoughts on how you persuade data holders to share the data and different approaches to managing this process would be valuable. This time, let's start with Peter, and then Natalia, then Imtiaz.
So I can talk about from the medical perspective. So it's a very piecewise process, and you're sort of putting together a bit of a jigsaw to make this happen. Typically, there's lots of small amounts of data available to the public in public data sets. These data sets are occasionally available for commercial use, but generally not available for commercial use. It's also quite small amounts of data. So whilst these can be very good for generating your proof of concept while you're in that research phase, and just because you're in a company doesn't mean that everything you do is commercial. If you're doing research in a company, then that's not commercial. So you could use those to create a prototype, as long as you're not commercializing that prototype or that data. So you can use those to kind of get the ball rolling. Then if you're really starting to talk about doing getting data from hospitals, or for example, or patient data, there's multiple approaches you can take. You can go directly to the hospital and attempt to negotiate a deal for data. I'd say in the UK this is very hit and miss depending on who you go to. So there are places like the AI Centre in London, which is and part of King's, and they are doing great work to try and make data more available. But if you go to sort of a standard hospital, they're going to find it difficult to deal with that. Even the hospitals that are at the forefront will have data committees who will try to put a value on this data and try to extract some value from it. And that's just a bit of a black hole where you just pour your time, and it's very difficult to make ways forward with it. One thing we found incredibly helpful was government funding. So getting funding from people like Innovate UK, from the NIHR, from the European Space Agency. This funding creates a structure and a contractual structure with the hospitals that you're working with, and that creates a framework for negotiating how you can access and use data there. It also puts an external time frame on it. The clock is ticking, and if you don't sign the contracts, then the funding disappears. And this puts just enough pressure on those organisations to get those contracts over the line. So working with an external body like a funding resource is very helpful. There's no easy solution to this. We've seen some other companies go really big on just going out there and negotiating contracts, but they typically have quite big commercial teams early on who are going out there and trying to create data contracts with companies. And then the other one is there are some companies materializing that they're essentially selling data on, so selling imaging data or medical data on. We haven't had much luck with them. To be frank, they quality of data is usually not particularly high, but we have seen some companies in similar spaces be able to make some progress there. So there are a few options, but it's not an easy situation.
It's a jigsaw puzzle as well. Yeah. And Natalia, I think you use both public information and sometimes get it from customers and even generate your own data. So how do you approach this puzzle?
Yeah, our situation is a little bit better. So we don't have to only purchase the data from hospitals. We work mostly with satellite imagery, and part of the satellite imagery is a publicly available data that is accessible through Copernicus or European Space Agency or NASA, and you can get it completely for free. So it helps a little bit, but not too much, because in order to make this data useful for us to work for sustainability, we also need client data, farmers data, and ground data, for example, sensor measurement, yield information, soil moisture measurements, and so on. And getting this data is very difficult because in agriculture the margins are quite thin and the data is very valuable, and people are a little bit protective of this data, and there are very few commercial and research data sets out there. So for this purpose, we worked a lot with European Space Agency and Copernicus on research grants that would give us access to the farmers who are willing to share their data. This was super helpful for us at the beginning, and even now we're working on a few grants which allow us to work in collaboration with farmers in the UK to get some additional data. So first, we also worked with our clients for free in exchange of the data, and that was very helpful. I would say, like, first 2 years we've been working completely for free with the farmers just to get some pieces of data here and there, but over time we accumulated significant amount, obviously, as the company is growing. So there are very few academic data sets in our space, but we do try to collaborate with all the organizations who are willing to build these data sets and maybe guide young researchers and talk to people like there is an organization called Climate Change AI who is gathering researchers to build these data sets. So we participate in all these activities where possible, because it's valuable not only for us, but for other companies working with sustainability and climate change, which I believe is very important. So there are multiple sources from which we can gather this data, and there is no one good way to do this. You just need to look for sources of jigsaw puzzle everywhere.
Yeah, great. And Imtiaz, what's your experience?
I think it's been covered actually by the two speakers, but I'll just add one thing, which is one pattern that I've seen across our, we've built probably 5-6 businesses in the AI space, some vertical, some non, some horizontal. And sometimes you can kind of fake it till you make it. And what I mean is you can find kind of parallel data sets that are relevant to the problem that we were working on, but are not exactly the same. As an example, when we were first starting, we put cameras inside a chicken shed and look at the inside of the chicken shed. We just put cameras in our office. We just put a couple of cameras there and try to do some of the algorithms there. We bought some fake chickens, like from eBay, like stuffed toys, and that was enough to train some of the detection models. And we started like that, and that allowed us to get to the next stage. So again, it's sometimes about thinking a little bit agile and lean where you can, but otherwise the other two speakers have covered what I would say.
So we've heard of synthetic data. That's another approach to generating
chickens.
data. That's brilliant. So there's a question about, I guess, about team skills. So this one is, the question is, what's the most important non-technical skill a technical person should have when joining a startup? This time, Imtiaz, maybe we start with you, and then Natalia, then Peter.
Yeah, I mean, the way I can think about this actually is, what is it that my business partners, because I'm not super technical, what do they trust that I can do? And I think it is probably a mix of fundraising. I think the fundraising is a big one. I think a lot of technical founders are scared a little bit about fundraising, or they even think maybe it's a little bit bullshit sometimes, the way that we have to talk to VCs and the way that VCs sometimes think. So I think the most important thing is the fundraising. As an example, with FLOX, my CTO has never had to do fundraising. His first company was bootstrapped to a whole bunch of users. So he's never seen that world that I'm from. And I drag him into the VC meetings to make sure that he gets to learn how VCs think. And he finds it initially he was like, I don't like this. I don't like how this whole space is. And eventually he gets to understand it. And eventually he understands the incentives, how are they aligned? What is it that VCs are looking for? So I think the big thing is fundraising. It's if you're a deep tech company, you're going to raise money. It's very likely, right? So why not learn how to do the thing that feeds your tech engine?
Thank you.
Well, I guess after fundraising, the second most important skill is people skill, because you are as good as your team. And team is extremely important, especially in the beginning where you're just like 3, 4, 5 people, and everyone has unique skills which are irreplaceable, so we don't want people to leave. And it is very important to support people and to guide people and to train them, not even mentioning that to find them, that's extremely important. So in our case, we've been lucky to work with a few great freshers from the University of Oxford that we managed to find just because we've been there in Oxford, and we visit all these career fairs, and persuading people to join a very new, fresh startup is very difficult, and persuading them to stay and to go with us through all these difficulties, because it's problems with fundraising, a problem with salaries, long working hours, a lot of difficult problems that are unsolved, and you just spend nights there trying to figure out how to solve an AI problem that researchers usually spend months on, and you have maybe weeks to solve this. This is very important to go through these very first years of the startup, and when you are scaling up, people skills are important to be able to grow your people and to find new people, because people come and go. Yeah, and to find a good team is very, very difficult. And I can speak about this forever, how difficult it is. And I cannot emphasize the importance of treating people well and making sure that they want to work with you. So that's a big challenge.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I would echo both of those points. I think one of the things about moving from, say, academia into a startup is, in academia, you get rewarded for becoming more and more specialized, and being, the one person in your area who can do this particular thing and this particular novel thing. I think when you move into the startup world, you need to be a generalist. You go from a specialist to a jack of all trades, and you need to be able to, have a conversation with a lawyer in one meeting, and then in the next meeting you're with the accountants, and then in the next meeting you're with the regulatory team, and then in the next meeting you're with the AI team. And so you have to be able to talk many different languages to different people, and be able to hold opinions on all of those things. I would say it can seem quite scary, but actually when you go into the startup, you surround yourself by not only your co-founders, but also professional services. So, you hire an accounting firm to work with you, you hire lawyers to work with you, and there's lots of specialists out there who focus exactly on startups and first-time founders as well, and who can support you to grow into those roles, of being able to have those broad conversations across a really, really wide variety of different topics.
Great. And then I'll ask one question before going back to the audience questions, so keep them coming, please. Competition and positioning and showing differentiation and competitive advantage. So sometimes you might be early on and there isn't much competition, then you worry about future competition. And then in sometimes there are other players out there as well, and they might be doing similar things or trying to do similar technologies to different niches. So what's your experience in kind of how much attention did you pay to the competition and kind of your positioning and clarifying and strengthening your competitive position and differentiation? Maybe we start with Peter and then Imtiaz and then Natalia.
Great. I would say in the industry that we're in, competition is almost essential. Especially if you're a startup, we're trying to change an industry like the medical industry, which is a fairly conservative industry, with lots and lots of regulatory, behavioural staid unwillingness to change. Trying to do that as a small startup, trying to change an entire industry is almost impossible. So having competition, I think, is really important, because not just you and your competitors together change the industry, but doctors like to see that if this is a good idea, more than one person should be doing it, right? More than one person should be bringing this to market. So it also gives them confidence. So I think there's absolutely, don't be afraid of competition. It can be incredibly helpful depending on your industry. I think as well, first mover advantage is not all it's cracked up to be. You end up pioneering the way, but people can follow you quite quickly and catch up and learn from your mistakes as well. So there's I think competition. I'm generally of the opinion competition is a good thing. Spending too much time thinking about them is a bad thing, but you really need to know what your differentiation is. And quite often we see people coming from the world of academia going, well, I've got novelty here, and my novelty is a slightly different twist on a machine learning model. That's not novelty in business. Novelty is something that looks different to the customer, or allows you to perform something different. And you have to understand what your difference is to the customer and why that will be meaningful to them. So you really have to focus and make sure you're different and have different offerings there.
Great, thank you, Peter. Imtiaz, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, that really covers a lot of kind of how I feel about competition, particularly how you create moats around your business. I think I'm always a little bit scared of competition. It's just a personality trait. So I'm always kind of looking out for who's doing what. It doesn't mean that I'm scared that we're going to be beaten by competition for whatever business I'm involved in, but it's more to do with being aware of the time cycles, particularly in deep tech, of building things and the ability to get it wrong. And so just being aware of kind of what are other people doing, how much are they raising, who are their customers in particular, are the customers finding their products sticky? I think one thing that I also would recommend people look at, and maybe not too hard, but a little bit, is kind of what your IP defensibility is. People look at IP as purely patents off half the time, but it's a lot bigger than that. It's also kind of how you engage your own tech team in IP. How are ideas flowing through to the leadership team? How are you then going, all right, what are we going to do with this idea? Or let's say you do deploy real things. Okay, are we going to patent it? Are we going to do this, do that? So finding a very good patent attorney is quite useful. Doesn't mean you have to file patents ever, but it's just useful to have that. It's one of the little Lego blocks of moats and defensibility you can create. But the biggest defensibility is product, as Peter was saying. Like, if your customers love what you're building and they use it every day or whatever it is, there's nothing that's better for you. But that again is also a Lego block. That's a core Lego block, but it is a Lego block. So it's a kind of finding out what makes a moat and then figuring out where you can build moats today or where you can do it in the future.
Great, thank you. And Natalia, what's your experience?
Well, we started at the point where there was almost no competition. So was a big blue ocean, which was very helpful at the beginning, but then the competition started to pick up. And I believe at this point it is very important to differentiate and focus on what you do and do one thing, but do it really well. And at the beginning, finding this niche might be a little bit difficult, but as competition grows, you understand what people do, what they can do, how you are better than them. So we, in case of DeepPlanet, we try to push on the academic excellence. So we do a lot of fundamental research. So we collaborate with research agency. We publish papers. So we believe that our strength is in this, whereas a lot of other people may be doing more variability of features and services that they offer to the customers. And I agree, this is very important to know your customer very well, what they do, and that helps you to differentiate. So competition is a good thing because it keeps you fit in a way. So it really makes you work your hardest and try to understand the market and customer. And it's very important to talk with the customer and ask them direct questions. What do you think of this? What do you think of this problem or this service? And yeah, competition can be good, and also it makes you work harder, really.
Great. There is a question from the audience. So when you're seeking investment, how do you manage the uncertainty about possible return on investment? I guess you are building a vision and a future, and there's uncertainty. How do you create a credible, trustable future, both with the story and with the numbers? So I think it's a good and difficult question. So maybe this time we start with Imtiaz, who's recently closed his round, and then we can go to Peter, who's working on his next one, and then to Natalia.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, because it's something that is often unsaid, but with experience, you kind of pick it up. Good venture capitalists are very aware of the game, right? They're aware that there's a whole bunch of holes in your thesis. They're aware that you're trying to jump across the holes, and they're also aware that in some cases you might be plastering over some of these holes. But I've always found that with VCs, they're also trying to get a sense for how good you are, especially if you're the CEO, at selling. So they are kind of, trying to, because if you can raise money, then maybe you can sell the story. If you can sell the story, maybe you can get sales, you can grow the business, you can empower your team. So there's a bit of that. I also think that it's really important to work kind of bottom up. So I'll give you an example with unit economics. A lot of time people go, $20 billion market, we're going to get 2%. And so therefore we're a unicorn, right? And I think people don't like that. What they prefer is kind of, in the pyramid principle, you work upwards from the bottom of the pyramid. So you say, this is the kind of value we think we can create in the low case. This is what we think we can do in the best case. There's this many types of customers out there of which Y might be willing to pay. This is what they're willing to pay. Therefore, here's my TAM, right? And this is that kind of pyramid that you're creating, which I think is it's more credible for the VC, sure, but it's also more credible for you. You know, it's something you can look at, you can change. Yeah. The other thing is, I think it's a good exercise to really think about data rooms quite well. So we use something called Notion. It's a great tool. It's like Wikipedia for your internal business. And we kind of create a couple of different pages when we're doing our investment pitches related to like the main questions that a VC might ask when they're trying to do due diligence on your business in terms of, you know, do I trust what these people are telling me? And VCs don't dig as deep as maybe you'd expect, but that's because their incentives are slightly different maybe than what people think. And again, going back to the point earlier when I said fundraising is quite an important skill, I literally mean there are VCs out there that will tell you about how they think, and they write articles about how VCs work and how the economics of VCs work. Go and read that. As a startup founder, you have to understand VCs almost as well as they understand themselves. It's one of the best skills I've picked up, is to understand like the principle of how they fundraise from their GPs and the LPs and what they're looking at when they look at you as a business. So really go out there. There's all the information is out there for free. So like, you know, you're trying to sell to VCs just as much as you're trying to sell to clients in some ways. So understand your clients, understand your VCs.
Great, thank you. Peter, what would you add to that?
So I think that's absolutely spot on. I think one thing I would say that is, if there is no risk in the return on investment, you don't need a VC. You can go and get a loan from a bank to do it. So the only reason to go to a VC is if there is quite a big risk. You obviously need a big market opportunity there as well. But I wouldn't worry about the risk. That they are there to invest in risky things. I think it goes back to a little bit what was said at the beginning, which is you need to understand what your milestones are for your company. And at each stage of investment, you should be trying to hit those milestones. And every time you hit a milestone, you're de-risking the company in some way. So it might be that you're going from nothing to your proof of concept. And so you've de-risked that you can actually build something that works. The next one might be you're going from that proof of concept to a product. And so you've de-risked again that you can build a product and get it out there. And then it's then on to sales. So can you actually sell it? Can you then scale up those sales? So at each stage, there should be risk in your company. And you should be looking to take that risk out in order to, through VC investment, to get to your next to get to your next milestone. And as you move through that journey, the risks should get smaller and smaller and smaller, but then the VC's returns also get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, great. Natalia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with two previous speakers. I think there's excellent points. There's very little to add. And what I would want to add is that your competition here is working for you, because there is a lot of research that they do that you can tap into, and especially for new companies, very difficult to understand your market. Yeah, so I'm working on sustainable agriculture. It's whether it's agriculture, whether it's wine industry, whether it's sustainable agriculture, agri-tech, so it's just so vast and it's very difficult to quantify. And your competition really helps you to do it. And also VCs explicitly tell you what they want to see, especially when you get to know them better. So you're talking to them for some time already. So there might be a lot of strategies, whether you talk to your customers and you understand what exactly do they think about your particular strategy and pricing strategy, and you go through from the pricing strategy to your like potential income in 5 years, or you take like this pyramid and say, okay, this is the market and I'm tapping into like 11% of this market. So both are good and they can work in one case or another. So we just need to guess which way is correct one.
Perfect. Next, we have a question that's about broad ecosystem. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about the UK AI industry, talent, compute, theory, breakthrough, whatever you can imagine? Yeah, so Peter and Natalia, then Imtiaz.
I was hoping you were going to go to someone else so I could have a bit of a think. I think we are very lucky in the UK to have the ecosystem we do. We've got top talent from the universities. I think if we look at what the startup ecosystem's like today versus what it was 10 years ago, it's almost unrecognisable. It's absolutely fantastic. I think we see a bit of brain drain to the US for some companies and certain talent. I think if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to make data more accessible. I think maybe if I sort of step away from Odin, but as a citizen of the UK and a UK taxpayer, I think what the hospitals perhaps don't understand is that whilst that data is valuable, it would be much more valuable to give it to lots of companies in order that they could build things that could help our patients and help our NHS, and create lots of competitive companies doing the same thing. Quite often what we have seen is that, you know, a big company will come in, buy up lots of, or put in place a contract to get lots of data, and then you essentially have one provider in the market, and then they have a monopoly on that. And I think making that data more widely available, it's difficult because it has to be done in a responsible way, it has to be done in an anonymous way, so it's not an easy thing to solve, but if I had a magic wand, I think I'd solve that one.
Thank you. I actually forgot who I called on next. So Natalia, I'll go to you next.
Okay, I would second on that. The infrastructure and the resources are really great in the UK. So we had a chance to work with a lot of organizations who helped us a lot in our journey. We managed to find excellent talent in the UK. So there are a lot of universities where you can hire from. There are a lot of technical resources and amazing infrastructure. And there are a lot of grants, research grants that you can tap to in the very beginning of a company. If I would have a magic wand, I would wish for more equality in the funding, because being a woman co-founder, I have seen a lot that the distribution in the co-founders is a little bit unfair, that women co-founders feel less supported and that they have less opportunities than men in this ecosystem. Although I admit that it's much better than in majority of places in the world, this is something we still can work on. Yeah, so otherwise I'm very happy with the place where we founded the company.
Great. Imtiaz?
I just completely agree. I mean, Natalia's magic wand answer is similar to mine on the fact that I think just early stage funding is so much more competitive in the US, and you know, we do operate in the UK in the global market. We have fantastic talent compared to some places in the US. The talent is also well costed, so it's just, I think we need more of that kind of early stage funding, funding that's a bit more accessible for diversity, all of that stuff. Yeah, so that would be a similar answer for me.
I mean, I agree with the speakers. I think open banking unleashed a tremendous innovation in the fintech sector, and more data, open data around other areas would also unleash more innovation in those areas. So I think I probably agree with you, Peter, there. And if I had a magic wand, I mean, I think still early stage transactions are happening much faster in the US, in Silicon Valley, with these safe convertible notes. We have them in the UK, but I think they're linked to tax advantages, and because of that, they're not as simple and as quick as, and maybe the risk appetite isn't as well. So I think if you can move as closer or as fast as North America, I think that would also improve the founders' journey, so they can get on with building the products. We have one question around I mean, you mentioned some names, but if you think about other incubators, accelerators, events that you can leverage to grow your company and build, find skills and connections. Any advice on some examples and how to best leverage them? So I'll go to Imtiaz first, and then Natalia, then Peter.
Sure. I mean, I'll obviously have to say the Creative Destruction Lab is awesome. Genuinely, I've been in a lot of incubators and accelerators for all my companies, and it's one of the best programs, and it's free, which is kind of crazy. It's such a good program. I mean, this program that I'm in Buffalo, in New York State funding, it's an investment. It's global, so anyone can apply. It's $500,000 to $1 million prize. it's opening up soon, actually. So if you're an AI company and you're kind of getting to the stage, you're hitting seed stage, apply for it, put my name down. I'm here right now, and it's a great program. I've had a lot of success with if you do any work with satellite or meteorological data or anything like that, the ESA big program is quite good. They give you sort of I think 50,000 euros, and it's a nice stepping stone, and they're really just quite a helpful acceleration program, and it's a good bit of good money to start your company. So yeah, there's one thing Europe does do well is we do really good stuff with grants and funded accelerators. On the VC side, it's maybe a little bit less behind Silicon Valley, but on the grant side, it's pretty good. So yeah, but grants are a whole other thing. I mean, I don't want to get into that, but it's getting harder. Yeah.
Great, Natalia.
I want to second on that. We've been to creative destruction labs that I cannot recommend it enough. It was very challenging, but very, very useful. So I think as a company, we grew a lot during this year. And also similar to FLOX, we graduated from ESA BIC. That was a big, big, big step for us in the very beginning, where it's really crucial to get a little bit of money, and preferably for free, so you don't have to give away equity. Since then, we worked also with Copernicus, which is a good source for the data and a little bit of money at the beginning of your company if you're working with satellite imagery and Earth observation data. We're currently working with TechNation, which is absolutely important in terms of people's skills building and training and networking. There are a lot of places to go in general for the companies, but if you're looking for one, I suggest you look at your surroundings. We've been in Oxford and we worked with Oxford Foundry, and we got from them resources and training, which was very, very helpful, and office space that can be super useful at the beginning when you cannot actually fund your office. So there are a lot of opportunities there.
Peter, closing words.
CDL, absolutely amazing. Can't recommend it highly enough. Royal Academy of Engineers have been great. They've got a number of programs, so that's fantastic. And just there's lots of specific ones that are perhaps smaller and not well known. So reach out to them if it's in your area, because the specific ones can be very, very helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you to Turing Institute for the AIUK event and giving us an opportunity to share the founder's journey, and thank you to our founders for taking time out of your busy days. It's been a pleasure. Good luck to all prospective and existing founders on your journeys.